Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be with Professor Al-Nasser as usual, and today we will discuss the history of the formal systems and its relationship to fiqh. As we know, or we will know now in the coming episodes, that Dr. Al-Nasser has been working on a project that combines between formal systems and fiqh, or what he calls algorithmic fiqh. So thank you, sir, for being with us
Thank you,
today.
Ahmed.
And
First of all, I'm not a prof. I'm just a doctor. I'm not a prof.
but
This
I
is
feel
important.
that you are a prof. Okay,
Well, you are
Dr.
saying,
Nasser.
anyhow, just to recap what we had until now, we discussed the background of all this, which shows that the normal way of normal means the contemporary Western way of looking at religion as a whole, as a phenomenon, and especially Islam was actually not um, really scientific. When we start to think about Islam in a scientific way, we found out there are many things which for which we cannot, especially Quran. Well, Quran itself is a phenomenon for which we cannot, we are incapable of doing materialistic model of. So based upon the idea of this incapability, Muslims from the early days of Islam started to treat this religion, and especially the phenomenon of Quran, as not man-made, and they started to treat it as a natural phenomenon or something similar. Of course, it's not a natural phenomenon, but it's something similar to a phenomenon which exists, and we are only trying to approximate what we understand of it. So this at the end resulted into formalizing many aspects of religion. The formalization came at the end of the Umayyad era, where the fiqh schools were established. And a fiqh school in itself is actually a formal treatment of Sharia. So the formal treatment of Sharia was very early. And when we discussed in the first part what formal is, actually, when I say formal, what do I mean by formal? We said that formalizing is the faculty or the way of precising whatever you are saying, defining a very specific language, and then having for this language a semantics, a very specific semantics for the language. So this is a difference between a formal system and a formal system, for example, of mathematics, and intuitive system of mathematics, where you don't have really, you didn't really think about the rules of calculation, but you just calculate. So you are calculating without thinking about what is behind it. Mathematics has been like this for decades, for millennia actually, until in the modern age, the people said, let us formalize it, even mathematics. Yeah? Physics also the same. And so it's not a surprise that we find fiqh also having its own formal system. And in the early, now I will start speaking about a coarse, very approximate distinction of fiqh schools. This distinction I'm making here around the relation between the scripture, from the one side scripture, whether it is Quran or Hadith, but mainly Hadith, because at the time of the establishment of fiqh schools, they were quarreling or disputing, let us say, not quarreling, but disputing,
Yeah.
dispute hadith.
Mm.
Actually, Quran has been
Primary
written. Many
source.
people,
Yeah. Mm.
because many people already knew Quran per heart. It has been at that time also written in the late Umayyad era. So Quran was there, and the discussion was hadith and how we, and language also. Language was not there, still not formalized, and still not even written down properly. What the fiqh schools were actually based around the relation between scripture on the one side and logics on the other side. When I say logics here, it's not Aristotelian. It was still at that time. It was not Aristotelian, but it
Because it
was
wasn't
only,
translated in the early period.
yeah, yeah. So it was not Aristotelian, but it was very simple, intuitive analogy. Yeah,
Mm.
qiyas, qiyas, and analogy. So of course, analogy and qiyas is something which is basic, and therefore um, um, scientists all over the world and in different civilizations had their own ideas about it. So the Muslims had also their own ideas, but there was this discussion: what comes first, a hadith, for example,
Mm.
or our analogy, or using our
Mm.
own
Mm.
qiyas.
Mm.
So around this, for example, there were Ahl al-Hadith, the people
Mm.
who were more inclined to take the Hadith as more relevant, uh,
Mm.
uh, whatever the degree of Hadith, except of course the Hadith which were weak or which were even wrong. Some Hadith were put
Mm. Mm. Fabricated
uh,
hadith. Mm.
fabricated, yeah. But I'm not speaking about those. But for example, Hadith al-Hasan, al-Hadith, and in the same time, of course, they started to discuss this terminology.
And this
What do we mean
terminology
by
came
Hadith?
later in the late third and fourth Hijri century. Abu Dawud, I think Abu Dawud al-Sijistani who put Hassan. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but they at that time still the idea that whether the Hadith was really authentic or not, it was discussed, of course. For example, what I know, the difference between in this respect between Abu Hanif al-Ahnaf and
Yeah. Yeah.
al-Shafi'it is that the Hadith al-Hasan is for Shafi'it higher than analogy, actually. This is from what I know. Um, Now, of course, actually, this is why we have four options here. Ahl al-Hadith is one option. They are in general thought to be Maliki and Mazhab Ahmad,
Ibn Hanbal. Mm.
and Ahl al-Aql, Abu Hanifa, and Imam al-Shafi'i
Abu Hanifa and
came
the
as
Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila and some Zaydiyya, but okay. Okay.
yeah, yeah. Well, there was no Mu'tazila at the end of the Umayyad era. So Mu'tazila came in the Abbasid era. In after maybe I don't know 100 years or
No, no,
something like
no,
this.
Wasil
It
ibn
might not
Ata.
be.
Wasil ibn Ata was the student of Al Hasan al Basri. So Al Hasan al Basri
Yeah,
was
Al-Hasan
followed.
al-Basri was in the time of Al-Hajjaj.
Yeah, yeah.
Of,
So this is the late Umayyad period. Yeah.
so it is the late Umayyad, but still it was not. When we say Mu'tazila, I always think of Al-Ma'mun, actually, in
But
typical form of
yeah, yeah,
Al-Ma'mun,
yeah,
not
yeah.
of
That this is the
because the peak was at that time. So
because
uh, uh,
they
of
were in the
course they had
minority.
this idea before, but the peak was at that time. Anyhow, I don't want to waste a lot of time here because this is a very coarse description. This is very coarse. You might as well have your own distinction. But for me, because logics and or I mean analogy from the one side and the other is scripture, this is for the context of formal systems very important.
Mm.
So at that time, we could already see that some people will say we will take hadith as priority. The others will say, and Ahnaf will say that therefore they are called Ahl al-Ra'i or Ahl al-Aql, will say no, we'll take the analogy. Of course, they don't mean we'll take the analogy to be prior to any hadith, because there are some hadith which are mutawatir, which are sahih, but they were discussing lower level of certainty actually. And then Imam Shafi'i came with the invention of usul, where actually he discusses all this. Now this is really a very important moment in the history of fiqh, and maybe in the history of science in the whole world, because this is the first meta science ever created. I don't know of any, and maybe I'm wrong, I mean, but I don't know, for example, mathematics, meta logics was maybe a little discussed in Aristotelian, but it was never a whole science. Of course, Imam Shafi'i did with usul a whole science. There is a whole science called usul, which has its own terminology and its own questions. The open questions in usul have to do with language, and in the same time, in the relation between language and rationality or aql. So logics is also one very vivid discussion in usul, whether we take logics or not, and if we take logics, what form of logics and all this, what form of qiyas is allowed. So here is the invention of usul is a very important point, because we said, as we saw before in the first part, we said a science is established when its meta science is established actually. Like, for example, we are now very clearly saying that we have the science of mathematics, the science of physics, chemistry, and all this. Why? Because the terminology of physics and chemistry, the way of deduction in physics and chemistry and mathematics, it's clear. It is this meta science has been already established, and we can say comfortably that we have a science called physics, because we have also its meta science. We have mathematics and its meta science. As we saw, physics has as a meta science mathematics itself. Mathematics has a meta science, mathematical logics, and so on. So after this, from the early time, late Amawi, before the Golden Age, there was the invention of usul, and then came a very important discussion. Is it analogy which we are using as logics, or Aristotelian forms?
Syllogism, okay.
Yes. So here came actually the translation. Here they started translation, and then they started to ask themselves, why should we take from Aristotelian when we have analogy? Now, this is a very big discussion, scientific discussion, also for us today, because analogy stands for induction, actually. It's a form of induction, while Aristotelian is a form of deduction. So there are people who said, we will do all Aristotelian, like Al-Razi, Ibn Sina. Actually, Al-Razi, Ibn Sina, and then after hundreds of years, Ibn Rushd. But those are three big figures who said, let us do all Aristotelian. Yeah? There are people who said, let's do all analogy. And these are the most school scholars, actually, Shafi'ite and Ahnaf and so on. They really don't use, when you say qiyas in Islamic studies, you don't mean Aristotelian normally. You mean the analogy. Therefore, when you read about it,
we have two definitions: al-qiyas al-usuli, which is analogy, and the al-qiyas al-aristi, which is syllogism.
Yeah, but it was the qiyas al-aristi was not really accepted actually. If you read the mainstream schools, yeah,
but it's in the books
schools.
of usul. In the books of usul, all even Hanbali schools like Abu Ya'la al-Farra.
Yeah, they mention it, but when you come to like we are going to see, inshallah, an example where the concrete rulings which use qiyas, where you use qiyas, the concrete usage of qiyas was not Aristotelian. It was not Aristotelian. It is a form of analogy. So and they are known about of this. Yani it's not, they are known, even Western scholars and philosophers, they know that qiyas is mostly induction. It's not deduction. If you use deduction, you are also okay. But most of them, they didn't use deduction. They used induction, as per my knowledge. Of course, here again, we might argue and discuss. So anyhow, there is all Aristotelian, all analogy, most school scholars, and of course Ibn Taymiyyah, who was very vividly against Aristotelian. And there is the middle way of Imam al-Ghazali, the guy of whom I am a very big fan, actually, Imam al-Ghazali. So Imam al-Ghazali had a middle way. And here the discussion was around not only the technology or the mechanism of analogy versus the mechanism of induction and deduction. It was not only the discussion about the mechanism, but it was also discussion about metaphysics. Actually, why Ibn Taymiyyah and al-Ghazali attacked the philosophers, because the people who said all Aristotelians, they brought also metaphysics within the mechanism of deduction. Of course, you can say al-Ghazali, and this is the way al-Ghazali, this middle way of al-Ghazali, there is the way of Ibn Taymiyyah, who even refused the mechanism itself. He said the mechanism of Aristotelian deduction is not right. And very similar to Ibn Taymiyyah is actually the late Wittgenstein. This is important to say here, this context, that Ibn Taymiyyah is not like one uneducated lunatic who just, like many people think of him as a terrorist. And
by the way, Ibn Taymiyyah is very well respected in the Western academia, and there are PhDs are wrote about Ibn Taymiyyah.
Yeah, but no, but okay. I mean, this is another discussion. Actually, no. In reality, through all the propaganda in the media, even Muslims, when you tell them Ibn Taymiyyah, they all think of Salafi and of bombs and of terrorism.
This is the paradox. This is the paradox.
Yeah, it's not a paradox. It's intentional. It's not a paradox. It is intended to the scholars who know Ibn Taymiyyah. Actually, I read for the first time very thoroughly about Ibn Taymiyyah in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So he's very. So what I wanted to say is that criticizing Aristotelian was not only something which Ibn Taymiyyah did and also Al-Ghazali did, but what for example, someone like Wittgenstein did in his second version of thought. And now Ibn Taymiyyah, of course, refused the mechanism itself, like Wittgenstein did in his late scriptures or whatever he wrote. And while Al-Ghazali said, we will take the mechanism and leave the metaphysics. So actually the position of Al-Ghazali is a very nice and middle way position. We'll take the mechanism itself, we'll take the machine, we will take the machine, the deduction machine, and leave the rest. And of course, if we take the deduction machine, we can deduce with it whatever we want, whether we are speaking about metaphysical assumptions or we are speaking about fiqh problems, whatever. So actually, Al-Ghazali put the first milestone for our project. Therefore, I'm calling also my own processor Al-Ghazali, Al-Ghazali 1, my processor, which I'm going to present to you in this lecture. This is the formal system I'm calling Ghazali 1. Why? Because it is this middle way. We are going to take the machine and leave the rest. You put for the machine you can use the machine for deducing new theorems about, I don't know, chemistry, physics, whatever, or about fiqh. It's not really relevant. The machine itself is different from discussing the machine and the way the machine is constructed the way the formal system behind the machine is much different than any assumptions you feed the machine with. Yeah. Now, of course, what is the problem with Aristotelian logics? Now, the people who took Aristotelian as is, they had very good intention, of course. Even Ibn Sina, who is very contested and who really went out of the box of Islamic uh, uh, thought. They did this with very high intention, but there were without their notice, they brought with them some very serious problems. So first, very important problem is the idea of an absolute truth, الحقيقة المطلقة, which can be accessed via logical arguments. So the first very and obviously very irritating idea, not only for Muslims, for anyone, is that there is a certain absolute truth behind our rationality and behind our consciousness, which we can access using logics. Which, if you think about it, it's a silly idea actually, because a human being is a tiny
relative being, cannot understand absolutely.
Yeah. So it's a little amazing that anyone comes to this idea, except if someone thinks he is God himself. Of course, this comes from atheism and from in the same time of polygamy. People who thought the gods are like us, but they are bigger. Yeah. So this idea of absolute truth is one very big, troublesome issue. Then essentialism also. With essentialism, it is meant that anything has a certain essence, and this essence is also attainable using logics. So we can actually, for anything in the world, we can think about its essence and try to write down its properties, and this can be done for anything. Yeah. So essentialism, of course, we know now that there is no essence, and it's not. We know now through physics that you for some phenomenon or a vast even for many phenomena, you cannot say this phenomenon has this and this essence. You are not sure that it has one essence. It might have many essences. If you see, for example, if you see an electron from one side, you think that it is a wave. If you see an electron from another side, it is a particle. So the question is here: what essence does an electron have?
Exactly.
Is it a wave or is it a particle? So essentialism has failed, of course, in modern ages. But there were even at that time discussions about this essentialism, and you find also Ibn Taymiyyah and Wittgenstein discussing this thing. Then you cannot model analogy except using generalizations. Of course, Aristotelian logics starts from general rule and a specific rule. So it's a very primitive form in which you cannot really put all analogy ways or inductive ways of inference. Not everything. Of course, here it's a little technical. Some people say no, you can do this. You can actually model induction using Aristotelian syllogism and so on. But it's not. There is a controversy. It's not a nice thing to say. I do everything using generalization and I keep analogy out. Actually, you have inductive and deductive arguments. They should come together.
They are complementary.
Yeah, they are complementary. And in the case of Aristotle, especially here, I'm thinking about syllogism. I'm not thinking about of course Aristotle and then Ibn Sina, and and all the Greek and then the Muslim philosophers, they spoke, of course, about induction and so on. But when we say Aristotelian logics, we mean syllogism. We don't mean induction. We mean syllogism. So here, there is also a problem. How can we model? We need to model analogy. We cannot leave it like this. And then number 4, this is very important. The limited expressivity. Limited expressivity means that I cannot express the sentences of language, normal language, as I do in natural languages. I have only noun sentences for Aristotelian logics. Of course, as we talked about, when we talked about decidability in the last part, we said that the more a language is expressive, the more it becomes undecidable. So a positive side of Aristotelian logic is that it is decidable, but it is restricted to noun sentences.
Okay.
Of course, we have also verb sentences, yeah? So how can we express verb sentences using syllogism? We cannot. So we have to enhance the syllogism to put the verb sentence.
So this is the limitation of the Aristotelian logic while dealing with Arabic language. This is a very important thing, huh?
No, not only Arabic language, all languages. Even in English, you can. I mean, English, Latin, and in any language.
Okay.
Aristotelian logics uses only noun sentences where you have a noun and you say something about the noun. Yeah? Like, for example, all men are mortal. Yeah? Or this guy is good. Yeah. So structure of the language itself, the sentences you can write in the language itself are limited to noun sentences. You cannot say, for example, Ali hit Muhammad. You cannot say. You cannot use. You cannot use tenses. Yeah. Of course, people has advanced this, and in modern ages, this is called natural deduction. Natural deduction is a very known subject in specialization, actually, in logics, in modern logics. But the idea is that whenever you extend the Aristotelian logics, I mean, the nice thing about Aristotelian logic is that it is decidable, it is easy to implement. Very clearly and nicely you can explain your deductions, but once you extend this expression with verbs, with tense, with this and that, it becomes very quickly very complex. Yeah, so this is also a limitation. Now I will elaborate a little more about problems of Aristotelian logics. So this strong semantic notion of absolute truth is actually was used as a demarcation criteria for science itself. One of the problems of the idea of the existence of an absolute truth, which logics can lets you attain, is that it was used as a demarcation criteria. If we remember, demarcation criterion is a criterion which differentiates between science and pseudoscience. Yeah? For example, you find Averroes, Ibn Rushd, saying the following: science is knowing the things or the thing as it is in reality. If we look at this definition of science, of course, this is the 180 degree different of what we discussed, for example, in about the modern epistemology as per Popper, because we know that our cognition is different than reality. So why did he have this definition? And it's not only his own definition, it was a definition of hundreds and thousands of scientists, starting from the Muslim time when Aristotelian logics came in until Al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali had a very different definition, and until the modern ages, many people really think science
Mm,
is not the thing as it is in reality.
mm,
They link science to reality. They link our cognition to ontology, which is completely wrong, as we
mm,
know, as we discussed in the first part.
mm, mm,
Now, this from the philosophy, this is called correspondence theory of truth. It's a philosophy called correspondence theory of truth, which basically means whatever I know is really what happens outside. Yeah? Now, and this is a side effect of the idea of absolute truth. Of
mm.
course, if I can attain using logic the absolute truth, then I have a link between science and truth. Yeah.
I think,
So,
Dr. Nasser, we have to stop here and to continue in the next episode.
okay,
Um,
good.
okay, thank you very much because I don't want to interrupt you in the next. So let's us leave it
Okay,
till this point, and we will take it up in the
okay,
next episode. Thank you very much, Dr. Abdul
okay,
Nasser, and see you soon in the next episode. Thank you
okay.
very much.